I've never been quite sure how to clean cookie sheets like this with baked on grease and dirt. I use soap and water, and it's not very effective at keeping the interior clean and shiny, or the backside either. So today I'm going to compare a few different methods to see what actually works and what is not worth wasting your time on. Some of these may be tricks and tips that you've heard of online, and I'm going to compare them individually and side by side to see what actually works. So today we're going to try good old soap and water, a magic eraser. We're also going to try a pink stuff paste that advertises that it can clean anything in your home. We're also going to try baking soda and vinegar, and baking soda and hydrogen peroxide. So before we get started, here are the 4 pans that I'm working with. The 2 on the left are a gold ceramic plated nonstick cookie sheet, and the 2 on the right are just plain old stainless steel cookie sheets. These are all over 5 years old, and they're used almost daily in a hot oven. You can see that they have baked on grease and dirt. My typical routine is to clean them with soap and water, but you can see that they really have this seasoned look to them, and I'm hoping that I can just refresh these so they look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to actually just take one of these gold nonstick pans and use it as a comparison, and I'll try to clean the other one so that we can see side by side how it looks after each different experiment. I'm going to start by just using my standard method and making sure that I'm properly cleaning them with soap and water. So I do let my pans cool for about 10 minutes after coming out of an oven before I ever try to put them in the water, because I don't want them to warp. They can warp if you try to clean them and the temperature change is too drastic. And here's just a closer up look at the one pan that I'm going to be cleaning. This is a high quality pan. It's not warped. There's no damage on it whatsoever. You could just see that it has this baked on grease on the front and on the back, and it particularly congregates on the edges and sides of the pan. I do sometimes use like a silpat type pan or parchment paper when I'm baking as well. And all of these pans look essentially the same darkness, the same amount of seasoning on each of them. So this would be a great way to compare how different and effective these methods are. So test number 1 is just going to be making sure that my current method is being executed properly. This is a soap and water method. I do make sure that my pans are slightly cooled, and I use really hot tap water and just a standard dishwashing soap like Dawn or Palmolive, and a standard scrubby sponge like this that is abrasive on one side and spongy on the other. I do use plenty of soap, and I do make sure that I get into the edges and I scrub thoroughly for a good length of time. I like to start by just removing any debris that might be on the pan left over from cooking, and then I really focus on the edges as well. And I do like to sometimes use a scratchy side, but I am a little bit careful because of the coating on this pan. I don't want to scratch the coating and lose the non-stick ability of it. I take a good amount of time with this. I feel like I put a lot of nice elbow grease into it, and even after thoroughly going over it with a sponge on both sides, it still looks exactly the same. It still has the seasoned coating on it and the burnt on bits as well. Although the pan is clean of any sort of debris, it doesn't look very nice, and this doesn't really do an effective job of cleaning it whatsoever. Whenever I'm finished, it looks exactly the same as it did before I started. So moving on to the next method, soap and water clearly isn't doing the job. So let's try the next best method. We're going to try using a magic eraser next. I have heard that this actually works quite well. I'm a little skeptical because of the nonstick coating on some of these pans, or even on my nicer stainless steel pans. I don't want scratch marks, but let's just give this a try and see what we think. I've heard that any sort of Mr. Clean Magic Eraser will work. There are a few different types. I have the thicker sponge type. These are actually meant for bathrooms, but that's just what I had. They also come in sheet forms, and I heard that those work just as well. So I'm just going to take one of these sponges. I'm going to wet it under my kitchen sink and squeeze it out so it's just a little bit moist but not dripping wet. And I'm going to give a good scrub to this pan, and I'm going to focus on one section so we can see if it's actually working compared to the other sections of the pan. So right away, I can actually see that this is lifting up some of the grease, and you can see this on the sponge here. It is getting some of this baked on grease, but I'm not seeing any sort of color change on the pan yet, and it's definitely not working as effectively on the really, really dark portions of the pan the way that I had hoped. So I'm going to just keep scrubbing on this for a couple of more minutes, and then let's dry it off and see what kind of result we get. So here's my final result with the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. You can see that it did absolutely nothing. So it did lift some grease up off the sponge, but nothing visible on the pan whatsoever. And it did require a lot of scratching and scraping, so I'm a little concerned that that would eventually take the coating off my pan. So let's try the next experiment. This is a quick and bright pink paste. It is advertised as being able to be used on literally anything in your home, from dishes to bathrooms to boats to carpets. There are instructions on the back that explain exactly how you can use the paste. You can actually dissolve this in water and use it in a spray bottle, or if you want a really concentrated version of it, like I'm going to be using here, you can use the paste straight from the tub. So you can take your time and read the instructions on the back. I've actually used this around the house and it's pretty effective on stains and laundry, but I don't know if it will work on pans, so let's just give it a try. Here's a close-up look at the paste. You can see that it's just a wet paste, and I'm just going to take a handful of it, apply it directly to the pan, and I'm going to use the same scrubbing brush that I used in my sink to just see if I can scrape away this debris easily. I'm even going to let this sit on my pan for a little bit of time to just let it absorb a little bit and give it another little scrub. And I'm just going to be using the lower 1/3 of this pan so we can have a visual comparison to the rest of the pan when we're finished. And I would say that I probably spent a good 5 minutes scrubbing this entire pan, focusing on the edges and the sides as well, where there's darker burnt on grease. And this paste actually performed a little bit differently than the soap and water and the magic eraser. I could smell right away grease and oil being lifted off. It did have a stronger odor. So I did feel like it was actually lifting more grease off than the other versions. And I could see in the suds that some brown grease was coming up as well. But as I continued to scrub, I just noticed that the pan itself wasn't looking any cleaner. But it did get up some grease, which is a step in the right direction. I applied more and I kept on scrubbing, but you can see the end result is that the pan looks exactly the same as when I started. So we need to move on to our next experiment, which is going to be something that I'm sure you've heard of. This is the standard baking soda and vinegar trick that I'm sure your grandma told you about. So let's see if it actually works. I'm just going to use a paste. So I have a bowl here and I'm not measuring anything out specifically. I'm just pouring a bunch of standard old kitchen baking soda into a bowl, and I'm going to add vinegar until it makes a paste, and I'm going to spread it evenly over my pan using this bristle brush. I'm going to let it sit for a little while before scrubbing it off. I have heard that people also let this sit overnight, so that's something that we could experiment with as well. I have also heard that sometimes people will sprinkle the baking soda on the pan and then put the vinegar in a spray bottle and just spray at the top of the baking soda with the vinegar. I don't really see a benefit to that. I want to make more of a paste that has some abrasiveness to it. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm just going to eyeball my paste, and it will fizz up almost immediately, and it does have a little bit of a gritty texture when you're finished. It's easy to apply to the pan, so I'm just going to let this sit to the side for a little while, and let's see what kind of result we get when we come back. And while that's sitting, we're actually going to move on to our next method, which is slightly different. This is baking soda and hydrogen peroxide. So this is the same baking soda that we used in the other experiment, but instead of the vinegar, we're going to use hydrogen peroxide. And in my research, this was actually the gold standard cleaning method. They said that hydrogen peroxide will oxidize the baked on grease and work a lot more effectively than the vinegar. So we're going to see if this is true, and they did recommend making a paste with this one as well. I'm going to be very generous with the baking soda and then pour the hydrogen peroxide directly into the bowl as well. You could also do the spray-on method with this one if you wanted to. And after I added in the hydrogen peroxide and mixed it up with a spoon, I noticed that this mixture was a little bit smoother than the one with the vinegar. This one made more of a smooth paste, and I liked how it applied a little bit easier. And because this is hydrogen peroxide, it won't fizz up like the vinegar did. I'm going to spread this on the pan in the same exact way that I did with the other method, and I'm going to let them sit side by side. And I actually decided to let these sit overnight to give them a really good chance at working. I had high hopes for these, and in the morning we're going to come back to this and we're going to scrape everything off with a scraper and give them a good cleaning under the sink and see what we're left with. So this is 24 hours later, and you can see that everything has dried nicely. And the side on the left is actually the hydrogen peroxide side, and this is the baking soda and vinegar side. You can see that it's more smooth and even actually on the hydrogen peroxide side, and everything is nice and hard here, so it's done its job absorbing all the grease. I have a standard kitchen bench scraper here that I'm just going to be using to scrape off the hard bits, and then we'll take it underneath the sink and give it a good rinse to see what we're left with. I'm really excited to see what the results are because everywhere I searched online really recommended both of these methods as the really final effective way they got their pans clean. So let's see what's what. So far, I'm scraping up a little bit and I'm not seeing really bright, clean sheet underneath. I'm seeing maybe just a little bit of stain being lifted, but I'm a little bit skeptical at this point. So let's finish scraping off all the excess and put this under some water to see what's under there. I will say that this rinsed off really nicely. It just took a couple of minutes to loosen everything up. I used a little bit more soap and water, and then I thoroughly dried it so we could take a look at our original pan that we have not cleaned yet to see how it worked. And here's the final reveal. The pan on the left is the one that we tested. The pan on the right is the one that we've done nothing to. The top section of this pan on the left used the hydrogen peroxide solution, and the bottom section was used with the baking soda and vinegar. You can see that the pan is actually brighter, but it doesn't look any better. There's still baked on grease on the sides and in the corners. But because it was brighter, I thought I would try it a second time. We'll let this one sit overnight as well. And I'm just going to use the hydrogen peroxide solution again just because I liked how that applied. There really was absolutely no difference between the effectiveness of the hydrogen peroxide and using the vinegar. So if that is something that you're considering debating between, it really doesn't make a difference. They worked effectively the same. So let's spread out our baking soda, and this time I'm going to squirt on the hydrogen peroxide using a spray bottle. Now that everything is completely saturated, I'm just going to let this sit overnight, and let's try it again and see if it really loosens up that extra dark burnt on grease. And the answer is no. It made absolutely no improvement whatsoever, but you may notice something slightly different about my pan now in the lower right-hand corner. It is slightly brighter, and that's because I tried a last-minute experiment. This last-minute attempt was with tomato ketchup and a scrub brush. I applied a liberal amount to my pan, and it actually did a more effective job at lifting up stains and took less elbow grease than any of the previous methods. I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. I just squirted a good amount of ketchup directly onto the pan, and I scrubbed. I didn't even use any water or soap. And I just applied a moderate amount of pressure. I found that it was most effective to use a circular motion like this, and you can already see that some of that staining is being lifted. However, this comes with a cost. It's not going to lift up those really dark black baked on stains, and it will actually scratch your pan. It wasn't worth it to me to continue on and damage the surface of my really nice pan, especially if it wasn't going to lift off the really baked on stains anyway. I did want to try one very last experiment of my own though. I assumed that the ketchup worked great because it had some acid in it, so I applied a direct acid. I didn't happen to have any sort of lemon juice on hand, but I did have a bottle of lime juice, so I applied lime juice directly to the pan. I let it sit for a moment and I used the same scrub brush, and it was just as effective as the ketchup. It did lift up stains, but had the same result. It scratched my pan and didn't lift up the dark stains like I hoped it would. So after trying all these popular methods, here's my final takeaway. None of these methods actually restored my pans without damaging them, and they were not worth the effort. In fact, the one method that worked a little bit here with the ketchup actually damaged my pan a little bit. My advice is it's just not worth it. These pans are actually seasoned much like a cast iron pan, and I've heard they actually cook food better than an unseasoned pan. I'm just going to choose to embrace my cookie sheets. I hope this saves you a little bit of time and frustration.